How the hell do I know her? I went through all the women I knew in my mind. Section by section, I went through them. My neighborhood, the gym, family friends, work. One by one, I discarded them. And yet I was 100% sure I'd seen her before. Somehow I knew her. That knowledge hovered at arm's length, and it annoyed the hell out of me. I hated unsolved mysteries. I hated them because I knew my brain would keep working on the solution, and I'd do something annoying like wake up at 3 in the morning with the answer. I watched her take off her coat and put it in the overhead locker where she had already put her carry-on. She looked in my direction, and though her lips curved in a vague smile, I saw no recognition in her gaze. Perhaps I was mistaken in recognizing her. But I didn't think so. I sank down in my seat, cursing the faceless receptionist who'd booked me a seat in the center instead of by the window or the aisle. The mysterious lady had no such problems and was seated by the window. For the 1,000th time, I studied her profile, trying to tease out where and how I knew her from. I continued to study her through the gap between the seats as she rummaged through her purse, finally pulling out a cell phone and placing it on the empty seat next to her. She leaned forward, her dark hair falling forward and hiding her face, and carefully shoved her purse under the seat in front of her. She straightened up and took her cell phone from the seat next to her. I looked away, wanting to respect her personal space as she entered the PIN code, unlocking the phone. When I looked at it again, I smiled. I finally had an answer to my riddle. A smiling image appeared in the background of the phone, showing her as none other than Jonathan Carstairs, the head of our engineering department. Thanks to Jonathan, I became head of the installation department. He was the first person to see me downplaying my intelligence. He supported me when Sue had fun with Carl, her supervisor, just as I supported him when his first wife did it to him. In the years that followed, he told me more than once that whenever he was visited by dark thoughts, he would hear my signature phrase to Sue, "So why did you have sex with him?" And he would laugh, and he would immediately feel better. He was my mentor and would take me with him as he climbed the corporate ladder. Many times I sat next to him at his desk studying the plan and saw a picture of him with his wife Priscilla. Priscilla Carstairs. She was a little older, her hair was a little longer, but it was definitely her. I smiled, feeling satisfied, a mystery solved. I thought about reintroducing myself. We'd met a few times in the early years when she was still attending Christmas events at work, but the fact that she hadn't recognized me before said she didn't remember me. I wasn't surprised. The Priscilla I remembered always preferred to socialize with management rather than the guys in the coalface. Despite her aloofness, if she had been sitting next to me, I would have refreshed her memory, but since she was sitting in the row in front of me, I decided not to. The conversation would be too awkward, and even though the flight wasn't filled to capacity, a rarity for a Friday in Brisbane, I wasn't about to ask the flight attendant to change my seat. I opened my crossword puzzle and, intending to cast one last glance at it, reached into my shirt pocket for a pen. I stopped mid-motion, half lifted out of my seat, and my tugging to my feet was only stopped by the seatbelt. There, on her screen, a full-color photo that definitely wasn't Jonathan. On the one hand, the guy was black. For another, he was a hell of a lot younger than Jonathan, and somehow I couldn't picture Jonathan taking selfies with his jeans unbuttoned. The words jumped off the screen and imprinted themselves on my brain. Hurry up, lover. In my opinion, there could only be one interpretation here. She was going on a date. She was another cheating wife. I felt a wave of sympathy for Jonathan. He didn't deserve this. Not again. If anyone knew what a devoted family man he was, it was me. One look at his office would have told the dumbest stranger that he loved his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. Her kids. Jesus, they weren't even biologically his children. Jonathan adopted them and treated them as his own. I didn't care what her reasons were. I didn't care if she thought he was indifferent, boring, a workaholic, or inattentive. There were no excuses. If she was unhappy in her marriage, she should have taken action to fix the problems or walked away. She had to finish one thing before starting another. Old resentment, old rage, old disgust reared their ugly heads, catching me off guard. Old instincts surfaced too, and my hand reached for my pocket, but instead of grabbing a pen, I clenched my fingers tightly on my cell phone. For a moment, I hesitated and let Jonathan assume he knew about and condoned his wife's behavior. I shook my head. Impossible. Jonathan was too strong a man to commit such a wimpy act. As if to confirm my certainty, my gaze stopped on her left hand. I smiled grimly. She'd taken off her rings and had even covered her ring finger with Band-Aid to hide any sign that she was wearing them. Perhaps she considered it a sign of respect for Jonathan and their marriage. That she took the rings off somehow made her a better person or less of an adulterer. Not in my eyes. Jonathan was a good guy. He deserved better than a whore wife. He didn't deserve a fool either, and she should be one. Or an ignoramus. Jonathan would never forgive her if he found out. Not with his history, not after what his first wife had done. Scraps of drunken rants flashed through my mind. I'll get my revenge on them before they take over my house. That bitch is in for a big shock if she thinks I'm going to cave in and let her walk away with all our property. Property I've earned. But she did. Thanks to a hairy lesbian judge who thought all men were assholes and deserved to be punished, she set him free. And all he's left with is the dilapidated cottage his mother left him. In fact, it was seeing Jonathan raped in court that helped me devise a plan to make sure Sue didn't do the same to me. I discreetly took a picture of her screen and then zoomed out to get a shot of her profile. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with these photos. On the one hand, I wanted to send them to Jonathan immediately. On the other hand, I didn't want to be the bearer of such devastating news. The breakup of his first marriage had nearly destroyed him. It had been years before he'd been able to start dating, let alone trust women again. I put my phone away. There was a passenger sitting next to me, and I didn't want him to alert Priscilla or any of the flight attendants that I was taking pictures of Priscilla unannounced. The 2-hour flight turned into torture. Every time I caught a glimpse of Priscilla through the slot, I was overcome with hatred and the desire to write to Jonathan about her betrayal. Was it a betrayal? Maybe she was on her way to her first tryst, her first step out of loyalty to Jonathan. Or maybe I was only witnessing the final act in a protracted affair. I pondered this and what conclusions I could draw from the evidence I had. A photograph of his pencil, a Band-Aid on her finger, probably to cover up a dent, and the shadow of an engagement ring. My values interrupted my train of thought. It just didn't matter. I got to the point where I drafted a letter, but whenever I thought about sending it, I saw Jonathan's face in the months following the collapse of his first marriage. I saw his proud smile as he showed me the last pictures of his adopted son and daughter or their children. I heard his voice when he told me about the first time his oldest grandson called him Grandpa on his last visit. God, how he loved his foster children. It would have been murder for him to lose them and their children. Did I have the right to do that to him after all he had done for me? Did I have the right to not tell him what was so important to his happiness? And would he even lose them? I've always been a decisive person. I've proven it through millions of decisions at work and in my personal life. Why then was this so hard for me to accept? It's simple. To prove my loyalty to a man to whom I owed much, I had to destroy a large part of his soul. Was I able to do that? Was I able to not do it? What would I want Jonathan to do if the situation were reversed? Easy. I would want the problem to go away and never come back. Thus, the solution to my dilemma was found. However, there remained a missing piece of the puzzle. Did Mrs. Carstairs not care for Jonathan? Or was it an outright affair? If the latter, were her preparations for an ambush on Jonathan complete? If I warned him now, would he be any less rapey when it all happened? Christ, he was only a few years away from retirement. Reluctantly, I devised a plan that covered all eventualities. It minimized my interference, easing my conscience, while at the same time protecting my friend and mentor from an unfaithful wife or a repeat ambush. Besides, the end result was somewhat up to the gods, and that suited my aging sanguine beliefs. I'll give this bitch a chance to show herself in her hand. I'd give her a fighting chance to minimize the damage already done. I would give her a chance to return to being a faithful wife. I would give her a choice that I felt was greater than the one she gave Jonathan. If she proves by her actions that this is not what she wants, then Jonathan will be told. Priscilla. I huddled in a corner, huddled against the small window so I could take another look at Paul's picture without risking the guy next to me seeing it. Paul looked good enough to eat. And Paul's abs were what Jonathan lacked. Not that he was in bad shape, but Paul was 25 years old and there was no comparison. Paul knew he looked good. It was evident in his confident pose. It was sexy and provocative, and I certainly felt provoked. Later, unfortunately on the way home, I would have to delete the image, but for now I could enjoy it. And I did enjoy it. As the plane leveled out, I furtively glanced over to make sure the guy in the seat next to me had his nose buried in Dan Brown's latest bestseller. Great, I wouldn't have to interrupt the conversation. I stared at Paul's handsome abs for a moment, fixing the image in my mind, and then turned the phone off. Smiling, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts drift back to our last interlude with Paul. We had agreed to meet in Sydney, in a small guest house overlooking the harbor to spend the first night. Sydney was neutral territory where neither of us would run into anyone we knew. I'd like to say we were romantic and went through the motions of sightseeing, lunch, or dinner before getting naked, but I'd be lying if I did. Driven by lust, we didn't leave the room after checking in. And that was the difference. That was what made our relationship with Paul so exciting and exhilarating. I loved Jonathan and he loved me, but after so long together, our lovemaking wasn't driven by lust. It was tender and attentive, every touch a declaration of love. With Paul, my animal instincts were reborn. All I wanted to do was rip his clothes off. There was no love or tenderness, just two people using each other's bodies for sexual pleasure and release. If I thought about the fact that we had 2 nights together, I would count on it. Otherwise, I would be very upset. Paul had a lot of stamina. After resting and taking a hot shower, we did it all over again. Lunch was forgotten, dinner was ordered in, and the shower got a good workout. Thank goodness Jonathan went on a rare trip to a construction site in Kimberley and didn't return home until 5 days later, which gave me time to rest, heal, and tighten up. Jonathan left me feeling loved and cherished. Paul, satiated and wrung out. I loved and wanted both. Passenger in seat 17. B. If it weren't for my current situation, I would have enjoyed quietly laughing at my fellow passengers. It always amazed me that as soon as the "Fasten Your Seatbelts" sign lit up, everyone and everything would run out en masse into the aisle, frantically running to retrieve carry-on luggage from overhead lockers, even though there was still plenty of time before the plane left. Normally, I would wait until the plane was nearly empty before packing my bags, but since the plan was for Priscilla to be a relatively short distance ahead of me, I joined the rest of the cattle class in the aisle. Letting the gentleman seated next to me and the passengers across the aisle pass, I managed to position myself 4 behind Priscilla. She gave no sign of recognizing me before, but I didn't want to take any chances, assuming it was an accidental mistake on her part. I kept my distance as we crossed the air bridge leading to the terminal. As I'd suspected, she headed for baggage claim. Women like Priscilla always took the luggage. The carousel was idle, the cargo hadn't been unloaded yet. My target scanned all the faces in the lounge before directing her gaze toward the exit. She tapped her foot impatiently and glanced at her wristwatch. As the first piece of luggage began to roll, her gaze shifted from the carousel to the exit. When her face lit up like a Christmas tree and she even took a step toward the doors, raising her hand to wave, I turned to look in the same direction. I couldn't hold back a mocking snort. How corny. Her partner looked much younger than I knew Priscilla to be. I waited for him to hurry toward her, hoping their greeting would let me know if this was a first meeting or one in a long line of encounters. My stomach sank. I closed my eyes, exhaling air noisily. The lovers, and now I knew it was them, showed no signs of shyness, awkwardness, or insecurity. For a brief moment, I doubted the validity of my plan. The bitch was guilty as hell, but the thought of what Jonathan, now in his 60s, would have to endure when his second wife betrayed his love and trust kept me on track. Convinced of my decision, I discreetly snapped a photo of their passionate embrace. Putting my phone in my pocket, I walked over to them, and while she was still in his arms and their lips were locked, I rubbed her shoulder. I heard the moist rustle of their lips and shuddered in disgust. Even years after Sue's death and the divorces I'd witnessed because of my spouse's infidelity among coworkers and friends, I still couldn't understand how one partner could so cruelly betray someone he or she had promised to love and cherish. To me, it was still the worst kind of betrayal one partner can commit toward another. "I'm sorry," I almost smiled at my platitude. "Mrs. Carstairs, you showed on the plane that you didn't remember me. But unfortunately for you, I remember you." Her turn to face me coincided with her companion's sigh. "Mrs.?" We both ignored him. "Who are you?" she asked, studying my features. Then, as I watched, her eyes half shifted to her beau. Had he just recognized something she wanted to hide in her eyes? It only took a fraction of a second before her attention fully returned to me. I could almost hear the gears of her brain going through memories trying to find me. I suppressed a smile when there wasn't the slightest flicker of recognition in her gaze. Unfortunately for her, like so many others, she was born into privilege and overlooked those she considered beneath her. Who I am is irrelevant. Who you are, on the other hand, does matter. Or better put, who you're married to. Married? Scylla, Lover intervened. You said you were divorced and have been for years. Paul, darling, please give me a moment. I can explain. I'm living separately. Have been for a long time. My ex just doesn't want to admit that it's over between us and is stalling the divorce. I watched him study her face. His uncertainty was as clear as a neon sign. I considered confirming his doubts, but I wanted her choice to be genuine, not made by a lover throwing himself at her. Anything less would have been unfair to Jonathan. Please give me a moment with Mr. She paused, waiting for me to state my name. I raised an eyebrow and replied, Dave. Give me a minute, with Dave, to get things sorted out, and then we can enjoy the weekend as planned. She was convincing. I had to hand it to her. If I hadn't listened to Jonathan earlier in the week, talking about his upcoming trip to Perth to see their son, I would have believed her. Loverboy nodded reluctantly. I could feel his gaze on my back as Priscilla grabbed my forearm and pulled me up by my ears. Not that it's any of your business, but like I said, I live separately. I appreciate your concern for my ex-husband, but I really have to insist that you leave me alone and stay out of matters that don't concern you. I was tempted to applaud her. She was such a good actress. But I still had an agenda in my head. She needed to make the choice freely and clearly, not be forced by a lack of options. Wow, you're good, I said, smiling good-naturedly for Mistress's benefit. So since you're so divided in opinion, who is Jonathan taking with him to Perth next week to visit Jared? She sighed and looked at me more closely. I sensed her annoyance at herself for not being able to remember me. However, she realized that I knew Jonathan well enough to be aware of his plans. I'll cut to the chase, Priscilla. I'm going to put you in front of a choice. You must think hard about it. Yes, a choice and a chance. What are you talking about? She was impatient. Her attitude irritated me, and I again wondered if I was giving her a chance to save my marriage. By giving Jonathan a chance to avoid pain, I was giving his wife a chance I didn't think she deserved. I pulled myself together and thought, I'm doing this for Jonathan, not for her. I'm talking about giving you a choice between Jonathan and your lover. I'm talking about giving you a chance to save your marriage and spare your husband the pain we both know he doesn't deserve. He saved you and your children from the gutter, and this is how you repay him? She turned pale, and for the first time looked unsure of herself. It was then that I realized I'd been seeing a facade in front of me for the past 2 minutes. She was far from a self-assured woman in complete control of the situation, but a frightened wife whose world was about to be torn apart. Ah, not so different, I see. What do you want? Nothing. I don't need anything from you. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I'm giving you something I honestly don't think you deserve. But against your better judgment, I'm giving you a chance to avoid Jonathan finding out about the boyfriend lover. I'm giving you a chance to save your marriage. Nah. Her shoulders slumped slightly, but since she was standing sideways to her lover, I doubted he noticed. What am I supposed to do? You don't have to do anything. Haven't you been listening? I'm giving you the right to choose. She nodded, and I smiled. It's almost noon. I'm giving you until 4:30 Melbourne time to call me from Area 03 to confirm you're back in Melbourne, or I'll send Jonathan the letter I've already prepared with these 3 attachments. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and quickly opened the folder with the 3 photos I'd taken for her. Oh my God, she moaned, closing her eyes. Please, please don't. Jonathan will be devastated. You really need to learn to listen better, Priscilla. I said you have a chance to avoid detection. You have until 4:30 local time in Melbourne, so given daylight saving time, you have a little over 3.5 hours to get home. But it's almost noon now. That's not enough time. Oh, it won't be easy, but there are several direct flights that will get you there in enough time. And there were, if only she would immediately ditch her lover and luggage to buy a ticket. Here's my business card. Call my cell phone no later than 4:30, and the email with attachments will never leave the drafts folder. Well, unless I suspect you're being unreasonable, as I've been doing lately. Call me at the appointed time, and from now on, treat Jonathan the way he deserves to be treated as your husband, and the letter and pictures will never see the light of day. She took my business card, read my name and title, and I finally saw things fall into place. She swallowed noisily, raised her eyes, and looked at me apprehensively. I smiled and nodded, confirming her unspoken question. Yes, I was that Dave. Watching her, I noticed the very moment she remembered the story her husband had told her. Great. Now she knew exactly how uncompromising I could be. At that moment in my peripheral vision, I noticed the chauffeur holding up a sign with my name on it. I turned a quarter turn to wave at him, and when I turned around, Priscilla was deep in thought next to the baggage carousel. Her lover was walking toward her again. As I glanced at my watch, I realized that I didn't have time to stay here and watch the events unfold. More than once, I had to be on time for the first meeting. From now on, Priscilla's fate and the fate of my best professional friend was in her hands and in the hands of the gods. Priscilla. Paul ceased to exist for me after Dave confronted me. I didn't bother to explain anything. All I could tell him was this: I need to get back to Melbourne. Lose my number. My attitude toward Paul showed that I didn't have an ounce of doubt that I wanted to save my marriage. Current circumstances aside, I loved Jonathan. Dave was right. Jonathan didn't deserve what I was doing. All these years, Jonathan had saved me. He'd been a knight in shining armor for me and my children, and I'd repaid him with betrayal. All because Paul reminded me of Jerome, my first husband. Jerome, who left me when I was still madly in love with him. Jerome, who had made love to me that morning when he left me, never to see me again. I should have hated him for leaving me. Instead, I always felt like I needed an explanation as to why. Why, if I did nothing but love and support him emotionally and financially? Why, if I kept my figure and was willing to sleep with him at the first opportunity? I never realized what I did to push him away. Somehow, my affair with Paul was a way for me to get the closure I hadn't gotten in almost 30 years. The fact that it also helped my 52-year-old ass feel young when the impending birth of Jared's second child was making me feel old was just a bonus. For the first time since I'd met Paul, I felt ashamed of what I'd done. Dave's words made me admit that all my arguments for cheating were empty. I glanced at my wristwatch. The time was going too fast. I looked around the carousel. My bag was nowhere to be seen, and made a hasty decision. To hell with my new Victoria's Secret lingerie. Screw the little black dress I bought especially for this weekend. Screw the phone charger. I dropped my luggage and raced to the ticket counter as fast as my stupid high heels would allow. I was born the daughter of a wealthy man, accustomed to privilege and respectful treatment. It helped when a man in a three-piece suit rushed past me with his briefcase in front of him to get a place in line. As I waited with barely concealed impatience, my stomach cramping from the delay, I let the memories I normally didn't want to let go fill my mind. Vague, faint images of the mother I'd never known. She died when I was 4. Could things have turned out differently if she had been alive? Had she loved my father? I could hardly believe she did. He was always stern and aloof with me, never affectionate. Later, when I became a teenager, I realized that he was also racist and snobbish, and those were some of his best qualities. If he had been kinder, more encouraging, would I have rebelled the way I rebelled? Would I have fallen so deeply in love with a man I knew my father hated? A young, half-Aboriginal, ex-convict, ironically hired with money my father had given to a local charity to avoid taxes. His name was Jerome, and he cleaned our pool. Jerome was fun for me. I got pregnant by him and, despite my angry father, married him. My father's reaction was as violent as it was predictable. As soon as I told him abortion was not an option, he kicked me out of the house. Total and complete disinheritance. I was brought back to the present by the grumbling of a three-piece suit. It took me a split second to realize the reason for his displeasure. The couple currently being assisted were Asian and clearly had a poor grasp of English. The more I listened, the more my frustration grew. Why can't they afford to hire a second person to help at the counter? Brisbane is the state capital, for goodness sake. My attention was once again drawn to the pantsuit. He was turning his head this way and that, looking at the counters of other airlines. It made me realize my own stupidity. Why was I standing in line at Qantas? Just because I had flown to Brisbane on their flight didn't mean I should be on their flight back to Melbourne. The trio took a step towards the Virgin Australia counter, and I made my decision. I took off my heels and, ignoring the amused looks, hurried to the Virgin counter, ahead of Three Fingers. He wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I need a ticket for Flight 512 to Melbourne, please. Ma'am, I have a few seats left on this flight, but the gate is closing soon. Do you have any luggage that needs to be checked? No, none. I'll need an ID. I handed her my driver's license and credit card and quietly asked her to quickly enter my information into the computer. I took the liberty of checking you in, Mrs. Carstairs, but even so, you'll have to run around to catch your flight. Here's your boarding pass. My fingers closed on the pass, and I ran toward the gate, holding my purse to my side with my elbow so it wouldn't dangle. As I ran, I lowered my gaze to check which gate to go to and then scanned the signs above my head for the corresponding gate number. I felt like I was in a movie, an innocent woman dodging her enemies. Except I wasn't innocent. All I had to do was pray that fate wouldn't punish me for my guilt. When I saw the line for security, I groaned. Making a decision, I headed for the fastest moving line, praying it wouldn't be like the lines at the supermarket where I could never exactly pick the fastest one. I tossed my purse into the plastic tray, at least by removing my shoes, which were studded with metal studs and buckles and should set off the metal detectors. I would save time. Placing the tray on the conveyor belt, I stepped toward the metal detector and only went through it when I heard the alarm. Please remove your belt, ma'am. I moaned. What a time saver I was, having already removed my shoes. Walking over to the trays, I undid the buckle of my big fancy belt, slipped it through the loops of my jeans, and unceremoniously tossed it into the tray. I went through the metal detector again and breathed a sigh of relief when the clerk nodded at me. It didn't even occur to me to put on my belt. I just slipped it into my purse next to my heeled shoes. I ran again, silently blessing the time my personal trainer had made me spend on the treadmill. I literally sprinted the last 2 yards to the gate, gasping with excitement as I slipped my pass into the clerk's hand. You're right on time, the flight attendant said with a smile as she scanned my pass and handed it back to me. Please use the back ramp, as you are occupying seat 23B. I nodded, still panting. I pulled out my heeled shoes and slipped them on my feet, awkwardly adjusting the straps. The only upside of arriving so late for the flight was that most people were already in their seats and their carry-on luggage was already stowed, making it much quicker and easier to find my seat. I sank into my seat, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I made it. This flight would get me to Melbourne at 3:15, just enough time to contact Dave and stop the exposure of my affair. Relieved, I turned my head to see who was sitting next to me. It was a young mom nursing a baby, a little girl with dark brown curls. Those curls reminded me of my daughter Carly. She too had curls as a child, silky black, and combined with her father's coffee and cream-colored skin, she always looked Spanish. Thinking about Carly as a baby made me think about other things, like the cleaning job I found a few weeks after I brought her home from the hospital. I lowered my gaze to my hands. There wasn't a trace of that hard work on them. Numerous manicures and hand creams had taken care of that. I didn't mind that kind of work. After my father had forbidden Jerome to work, we had no choice. And although my meager income was an inconvenience, I considered us happy. I was happy, of course. Even moving from the mansion to the tiny trailer didn't matter to me. There was more love in that tiny trailer than in my father's entire huge house. There was so much love that I got pregnant again, and Jared joined our happy family a month early after a difficult pregnancy. In the last month or two of my pregnancy, things were even more stressful than usual because I couldn't work, and the unemployment benefits we were receiving barely covered the rent. Despite the hardships, I was happy and made sure Jerome knew that I didn't regret anything. I never complained, even when I was trying to balance 2 kids and a job. But as it turned out, my happy family was only an illusion. Jerome, true to his Aboriginal heritage, was restless about his attachment to one place. He spoke wistfully of the outback and told me stories of his grandfather's wanderings. And yet I never thought he would really leave me. Leave us. How wrong I was. One day, coming home from work after a long bus ride, I found 5-year-old Carly looking after Jared. The car, Jerome, and everything of value, including my grandmother's brooch, were gone. I later discovered that the meager contents of our bank account had disappeared as well. Worse, he had left me in debt by not paying my trailer rent for the last month. The trailer park manager was deaf to my pleas. No tears moved him. My children and I went from a happy, albeit humble home, to homelessness. That's how Jonathan found us. The voice on the intercom brought me back in time. I groaned. Instead of the expected warning to buckle up, we were notified of a 30-minute delay due to the need to retrieve a no-show passenger's luggage from the baggage claim. Upon hearing the reason for the delay, I couldn't contain my poisonous thoughts. Screw the airline rules that said if a jerk passenger fell asleep in the terminal and didn't show up at the gate after check-in, everyone else had to stick around while their luggage was taken from the plane. I hoped the asshole would die in his sleep. Looking down, I saw my knuckles turn white as I clutched my purse. Taking a few deep breaths, I made a conscious effort to loosen my grip. Relax, I told myself. What's the worst that can happen? You'll arrive at 3:45, not 3:15. You'll still have plenty of time to contact Dave and avert disaster. To distract myself, I let my thoughts drift back to my meeting with Jonathan. What I remembered most from that first meeting was his kindness and concern. He looked at me with his soft gray eyes, and I knew immediately that I could trust him. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" he asked. Those 7 words opened the floodgates and made me burst into tears as I told my story. Of course, my sobs elicited similar sobs from Carly and Jared. Poor Jonathan. Not that he was shocked. Somehow he calmed us all down, quieted us all down, and gave me enough confidence that I didn't protest when he put us in his car. Nor did I protest when he drove us to the trailer park and helped me pack the rest of my belongings that didn't fit in the only suitcase I had. Tears came to my eyes as I remembered him squatting down in front of Carly and Jared, offering them each a cone of ice cream. Gently but firmly, he told them to sit under the big elm tree while he and I filled the trunk of his car with what little I had of kitchen utensils and laundry. And it didn't end there. He drove us to his house, which had a small 2-bedroom apartment for my grandmother in the back corner. After dropping us off and telling us to unpack and make ourselves at home, he went shopping for the week ahead. I hadn't seen such a full fridge and pantry since I left my father's house. It was like Christmas. It wasn't until much later, when I was sure the kids and I wouldn't be thrown out on the street, that I plucked up the courage to ask Jonathan what he was doing in the park that day. By then, I had been his housekeeper for a few weeks and knew he worked across town from the park. I was just about to rent an apartment for my grandmother to a real estate agency whose office is across the street from the park. He must have seen the look of panic on my face. I remembered the feeling exactly, clutching my chest so tight I could barely breathe. "Don't worry, Priscilla," he said, patting my arm reassuringly. "Having you and the kids living in an apartment is much better for me. Now I come home to a clean house and home-cooked food. And freshly washed and ironed clothes," I added, wanting him to know exactly how much I'd done. "Yeah, that too." A lump formed in my throat at that memory. Not once had he made me feel like a beggar he'd shown mercy to. Not once had he ever seen it as charity. Not once was he ever generous or benevolent. He trusted me with the keys to his house, opened accounts for me to shop for both families, and even paid me a small allowance. I could have robbed him, run off with his money. Hell, I could sneak up on him in the middle of the night and stab him while he slept. And I guess in a way I did. I stabbed him in the back. Only I'd waited almost 30 years for that. Facing the truth of what I'd done was too hard. My mind shied away from it. I'd only dated Paul 4 times. It wasn't love, it was closure. It was the last wave of youth. Jonathan doesn't know, and God willing, he never will. I will make it up to him. The simultaneous movement of the plane and the pilot's announcement interrupted my thoughts. I checked my watch. Takeoff was delayed by 40 minutes. I frowned and prayed that there would be no delays. Once the plane leveled out, I pulled out my phone and checked the weather forecast for Melbourne. This city is known for experiencing all 4 seasons in one day, and the last thing I wanted was for any storm to further delay my flight. I relaxed. Sunny, showers possible. After calming down, I returned to my thoughts. I was sure Jonathan didn't know anything about my brief affair. What he didn't know couldn't hurt him. I just had to keep him in the dark. Really, what had I done wrong? Nearly 30 years later, I had a brief affair. An affair that in no way threatened Jonathan or our marriage. Not once during my time with Paul had I even considered leaving Jonathan. What's more, in some ways Jonathan benefited from it. Paul made me feel young and sexy. Jonathan got my renewed libido. What's the worst that could happen? If Jonathan found out, I'd have to throw myself on his mercy and beg for forgiveness. He loves me. He won't want to lose me and the children. It may take time and it may be hard, but he will forgive me. I thought about it for a long time. What if he doesn't forgive me? What if he throws me out? We had a prenup. Infidelity on one side meant walking out of the marriage with virtually nothing. Even when the infidelity clause bothered me, I brushed it off. The agreement had been drafted and signed almost 30 years ago, and there had been several cases in the news recently where prenups had been overturned by the courts. Besides, I couldn't imagine Jonathan wanting to see me penniless and homeless. After all, he had already saved me from a similar fate once before. He was a knight in shining armor, not an avenging devil. And then there was Carly and Jared and their kids. If he abandoned me over one little indiscretion, leaving me destitute, the kids would disown him. He'll be devastated if he loses them. He won't want to risk it, no matter how upset he is with me. My thoughts went back to the past again. I closed my eyes and saw Carly and Jared's faces when we came home after going grocery shopping and discovered Jonathan had set up a little playground for them in the backyard, competing with swings, a slippery bottom, and a climbing frame. How many times have I looked out the window to see Jonathan pushing one or the other of them onto the swings? Too many to count. It was the same with the pool he built when they got a little older. How many times did I watch him play and splash with them? So many that one thing merged with another. He was a wonderful father, patient but firm and always made time. He never missed a soccer game, school event, or birthday party. He loved my children, always had and always would. Of that, I was sure. And now we had grandchildren, and I knew for sure that he loved being a grandfather as much as he loved being a father. He'd be heartbroken if Carly and Jared cut him out of their lives and the lives of their children, and that's probably what would happen if he divorced me and left me penniless. Blood, after all, is thicker than water. He wouldn't take any chances. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. I may have to suck up to Jonathan to win his favor and restore his pride, but I won't lose him. And if by some chance I'm wrong, well, then I would fight Jonathan in court. I would live with Carly and her husband Jack and argue that my youth and situation as a young single mother left me no choice but to sign a prenup. I have been a good and loving wife to him for almost 30 years. The court would not allow him to leave me with nothing. The pilot's thin voice over the intercom brought me back to reality. At his words, my chest felt empty, as if my heart had fallen into my stomach. Delays again. An emergency medical flight bound for Melbourne meant that all other incoming flights had to be on standby. God, how long would this take? Please, Lord, no more than 20 minutes. Then I'd have 20 left to get off the plane and find a landline to call Dave from. Every minute without news was agonizing. Time seemed to go by too fast. In my mind's eye, I could see the hourglasses where the sand was rushing down a thin funnel, forming an ever-growing pyramid at the base. I looked at my watch. 15 minutes had passed. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. "Miss, when the hell is the pilot going to land this flying bucket?" I asked the young stewardess demandingly, grabbing her arm to make her stop. "Excuse me," she asked, smiling. I said, "When are we going to land? These delays are getting annoying. What kind of airline do you have? I have an important meeting, and if we don't land soon, I'm going to be late." "Ma'am, we're waiting for the Royal Flying Doctor's flight. That means the patient has a critical injury or illness, possibly a life-and-death situation. I'm sorry, but under aviation rules, that's more important than appointments, meetings, connecting flights, dignity, or any other reason they're traveling. The pilot's hands are tied. We can't land without authorization from Melbourne air traffic controllers. We appreciate your patience." Bitch, I thought, stretching my mouth in what I hoped was a smile. The minutes flew by like jet propulsion, but each second held 1,001 thoughts and feelings, too many for such a short period of time. "Hello, this is John Smith, your captain. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the Flying Doctor's flight has landed. The bad news is that since we have refueled in Brisbane, we are being asked to remain on standby until the low-fuel flights land. We estimate that the delay will be about 20 more minutes. We thank you for your patience." Shit, no. The words came out of my mouth without any filtration, loud enough to catch the attention of the surrounding passengers. The looks directed at me ranged from amused to disgusted. Embarrassed, I lowered my head and stared at my wristwatch, calculating the numbers. At best, the delay meant I'd only have 15 minutes to get off the plane and find my phone. At worst, 5 minutes. It was too thin. I needed to get in touch with Dave. I had to let him know about the delay. Second, I leaned over and pulled my purse out from under the seat in front of me. Fighting panic, I fumbled for my cell phone. I'll text Dave. He'll understand. He'll understand. Sure enough, the phone was on the bottom, and I had to forge it out from under my wallet, belt, and notebook. The screen was black. I frowned. Had I turned it off before? I couldn't remember. I knew the battery was low. I'd noticed it when I'd gotten a text message from Paul before takeoff for what seemed like an eternity. I pressed the power button. Nothing. No, 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 no. It couldn't be dead, but it was. Why? Oh, why hadn't I charged it before I left? Why did I put the second charger, leaving the main one at home, in my suitcase instead of my purse? Because I wanted to be able to half-truthfully tell Jonathan that I forgot to charge my phone, and that's why I missed his calls. I whimpered, hit the power button again, and prayed for a miracle. None happened. What am I going to do? Please have us land in time for me to get to the payphone at the terminal. I looked at my watch, silently begging for time to stop until we landed. I gazed into each flight attendant's face, looking for a clue as to when we would land. I silently asked the pilots to announce that we were next in line. The wait was unbearable. My nerves were stretched to the limit. One more delay and I was sure they would break down. 4:05, 4:09, 4:12. With each passing minute in which there was no word from the airline staff, I was struggling to contain my panic. I don't want to lose my husband. I don't want to fight him in court. I don't want to explain to my children why their father and I are feuding. I want my old life back. The one where Jonathan looks at me condescendingly and his eyes are full of love and affection. 4:17. Ladies and gentlemen, we are making our final run. We thank you for your patience during the unforeseen delays and I didn't hear the announcement continue. All that mattered to me was that we were landing. Finally, I slung the strap of my purse over my shoulder, intending to be the first off the plane, even if I had to push and shove other passengers out of the way to do so. The feeling of pressure as we came in for boarding was unusually satisfying. The sound of the wheels hitting the pavement was music to my ears, and the roar of the reversing engines was a veritable symphony. As soon as the "Fasten Your Seatbelt" sign flashed, I sped out of my seat and headed for the back entrance. It would be better if they landed from the back of the plane. I felt a wave of anxiety come over me. The other passengers and even the flight attendants avoided looking at me. They probably thought I had lost my mind. They weren't far wrong. Opening the back doors was like opening an airlock, and like a flood, I sprinted down the stairs and dropped to the sidewalk. I quickly entered the terminal, my gaze darting left and right in search of a payphone. I ran, ignoring the stares of the other passengers, scanning ahead of me, frantically searching for a phone. As I approached the main terminal, where all the stores and snack bars were located, I spotted one. Breathing a sigh of relief, I increased my speed and came to a stop, nearly colliding with a phone booth. With a quick glance at the phone, I realized that this place accepted both credit cards and coins. Thank goodness I wasn't sure how much change I had in my wallet. I pulled my wallet out of my bag, cursing myself for not thinking ahead and keeping it ready. 4:29. I inserted my Visa, holding Dave's card at eye level, and started dialing. Credit card payments are temporarily unavailable from this phone. Please use coins. The recorded message made me want to scream, but strangely enough, I groaned. I grabbed my purse. All I had were 50, 20, and 10 cents. I prayed it was enough to connect to Dave's cell phone. I balanced it between my ear and shoulder again, holding Dave's business card in one hand and pressing buttons with the other. The call went to voicemail. Dave, I'm in Melbourne. My time was up. No, God is in heaven. No. I glanced at the clock. 4:32. My legs had turned to jelly. I sank to the floor, still clutching the pipe. My life as I knew it was over. At that very moment, Dave was communicating with Jonathan, informing him of my betrayal. The possible words and phrases that would fill his letter flashed through my mind. My mind was too shaken to grasp and understand any of them. I saw the pictures of Dave with Paul again, my kisses with Paul. Jonathan would be devastated, heartbroken, destroyed. And it was my fault. Clearly, as if he were standing in front of me, I saw Jonathan's face. His broken, grief-stricken face. Tears streaming down his cheeks. I had only seen that look on his face once before, when we almost lost Carly to cerebral meningitis. It was in that moment that I realized how much I cared about him, how much I loved him and needed him. My hands were dry with guilt. I had hurt him in the worst way possible, and to compound my crimes, I had spent every minute since Dave had confronted me rationalizing my act, downplaying my actions, justifying myself. What the hell was I telling myself? Closure. Why would I want closure in a relationship that not only abandoned me and my children, but left me penniless and in debt? Worse, am I so vain and shallow, so pathetic, that I need a younger man to like me in order to feel attractive and desirable? Apparently so. How could I ever think of fighting Jonathan in court? How damn self-centered could I be? How self-centered had I become? The thought of being on the opposite side with Jonathan is just wrong. Had I, in spite of myself, turned into my father? My stomach clenched hard again, so deep was my shame. Dave. 4 o'clock popped up in the bottom corner of my laptop screen. I sighed, not knowing if it was a blessing or a curse that my afternoon meeting ended early, giving me time to think. Come on, Priscilla. Call, damn you, woman, call. I reread my letter to Jonathan, tweaking it here and there, wishing I'd edited it instead of deleting it. 4:07. I checked my phone's volume and charge. I knew it was fine, but I needed something to keep my hands busy. I stared at the screen, wishing it would light up with an incoming call. It should have come in by now. I wasn't used to regrets, but right now I was cursing myself for being distracted and losing sight of that bitch at the airport. Some sign that she'd gone back to her lover on the street or run to the check-in counter would have made my decision easier. To kill time, I wrote down every possible flight number she could leave with. After that, I crossed off all the ones that had already landed. The remaining list was quite small. Please, I begged her silently, please don't make me a tool to destroy my friend and mentor. Please don't make me the messenger of such shattering information. Please love him enough to want to protect him from such pain. Please want to save your marriage. 4:14. I growled irritably. With measured movements, I brought the coffee cup to my lips. I would have preferred to hurl it at the opposite wall, but I was too well in control of my actions. Kolka, you damn selfish, arrogant bitch. 4:19. I twisted my neck from side to side, trying to release the tension. It wasn't helping. I got up and walked. There was no medication, but I felt better. 4:23. As I watched, the status of the last flight from Brisbane to Melbourne that hadn't landed by 4:30 had changed from delayed to landed. Everyone else had been on the ground for at least half an hour already. Call. Damn you to hell. Ring. That man is the best thing that ever happened to your ungrateful ass. Ring. The pace wasn't helping anymore. The temporary office I'd been assigned in Brisbane wasn't big enough to contain my stress. I had to do push-ups. First things first. Should I do what I was going to do? 2. It came down to this. If she wanted to save her marriage and prevent Jonathan's ruin, she'd be in Melbourne right now. 3rd. If she had called now, I would have kept silent and not devastated my friend. Wouldn't have been indirectly to blame for ruining his life. 4th. If she hadn't called, she would have stayed in Brisbane. She had no interest in saving her marriage. She had already made the decision to leave Jonathan and may even have begun to act on it in order to be on the winning side of the divorce. I had already turned 15 when a terrible thought popped into my head. Damn it. Had I made a huge error in judgment? Had she taken advantage of the time that had passed since I'd left her at the airport to carry out her plans to ruin my friend's life? 16. If so, what kind of friend was I to help a good man who'd been massacred again? I did 20 push-ups, vowing that if Jonathan was in trouble, I would help him in any way I could. Emotional support, financial support, hitman. 4:29. Damn you, you heartless whore! I logged back into my laptop, which was idling. My email immediately opened in front of me. My finger hovered over the send icon. I groaned. I couldn't do this. I couldn't break the news to him in such an impersonal way. 4:30. Time had slowed down. I stared at that horrible device for what seemed like an eternity. 4:31. I reached for the phone. Jonathan's number was one of the most recent on my call list. Hey Dave, how are things in Brisbane? Hearing Jonathan's voice, I almost stopped hearing my own. Jonathan, I have some bad news. Information I really wish I didn't know. There was silence in my ears. Are you still there? Yes, okay, spit it out. Did we lose the contract? I closed my eyes. Of course, he could assume it was work-related. He trusted Priscilla. She and the kids were the center of his world. Nobody. Everything's great on the work front. It's about Priscilla. She was on the same flight as me this morning. Actually, she was sitting in the row in front of me. Then I told him everything. Saw the picture on her phone. Saw her kissing her lover, guessed it wasn't the first time. A confrontation. The choice I'd given her. Her obvious decision. Throughout it all, Jonathan remained silent. At the end, I asked if he wanted copies of the photos and asked him to approve my choice of action. To the first question, he simply replied, "Yes, please," in a voice that was clearly trying to remain calm. The answer to the second was preceded by a few seconds of silence. "Thanks, buddy. You're doing great. I gotta go." A dial tone informed me that he had hung up. My conscience skyrocketed, but deep sadness over my friend's fate curbed it. Finally, I pressed the send button on my letter. It bothered me to the core that I was 2 states away from him, unable to comfort him or at least make sure he hadn't done anything stupid. Then I cursed myself. Belinda, the other half of me after Sue's death, was sitting at home, no more than 10 blocks from where my friend was sick. I picked up the phone again and called her, grinning. Belinda actually turned out to be as smart as Sue thought she was. She listened to the story and was on her way to the car when I finished. After asking for the address, she called. "Priscilla. Are you okay?" The older woman's kind words brought me back to the present. "Yes, thank you for your concern." I struggled to my feet and tried to smile encouragingly at the older woman who was still looking at me with concerned eyes. I turned to the central terminal, trying to keep my mind clear and not panic. Phone. I needed to find another phone that accepted credit cards and call Jonathan. Hopefully my call would reach him before Dave's letter did. A confession from me had to be better than from someone else. It took 2 tries to find a fully functioning public phone. If I hadn't been so focused on getting in touch with Jonathan, I would have resented Telstra's inactivity. I called his cell phone first, but the call went to voicemail. I considered leaving a message, but decided against it. I wanted to speak to him directly. I knew Jonathan would be home. He often worked from home on Fridays, so I called the landline. I could hardly hold back tears when that call went to voicemail, too. When would I get a break? Desperate for him to hear it from me first, I decided to come clean. I could talk more about it when we were face to face. "Jonathan, it's me, Pris. Honey, I did a terrible thing, and I'm so sorry I did it. It wasn't you. You didn't do anything, and you didn't do anything. Oh God, I'm so exhausted. It's so hard for me to tell you. I'm so ashamed. Oh my God, I had an affair. An affair, actually. I was so stupid and vain that I let myself get out of control with this young man. His name is Paul, and I only dated him 4 times. I swear it's true, honey. Please believe me when I say I love you and only you. I was stupid. A stupid, selfish cow. I know that. And I can't tell you how sorry I am. I was going to meet him this weekend in Brisbane, but I ran into your colleague, Dave. I can't remember his last name. And he made me realize how horrible and wrong I've been, and I wish I could take back everything I've done. I wish I could go back in time and make different choices. Please forgive me. Please don't leave me." I heard a beeping sound as if I'd been unplugged. The time was up. I rummaged through my purse looking for a tissue to wipe away the tears my confession had caused. "What's next, Pris?" I asked myself quietly. "Home," I replied. "Take a cab home, throw yourself on your knees, and beg like you've never begged before." Decision made, I headed toward one of the many exits from the terminal. Fortunately for me, there was a line forming at the cab stand. Of course, there was a line. It was late Friday night, and every man and his dog wanted to get home. Finally, my turn came up. I looked at the driver and held back a groan. He was a Sikh. Please let him speak good English. I gave my address in Carlton, receiving a nod in return. Friday afternoon traffic was obnoxious, and as is usually the case when one is in a hurry, every traffic light seemed to turn red as we approached. At times I felt like I could walk faster than we were going. All the while I stared out the window, holding back tears, and prayed. I prayed in a way I had never prayed before. I reviewed the situation repeatedly. Had the worst of what could have happened changed after my confession and/or Dave's revelations? I, more than anyone else, knew how deeply scarred Jonathan was by his first wife's infidelity. After all these years together, would he give me another chance or would he throw me out too? And if he did, would he be generous in his settlement or would he show no mercy? If I had to fight for my share of our property, I didn't know whether I had the strength or not. Finally, we stopped by the mailbox leading to my house. Jonathan's car was parked in the driveway. At least he was home. I walked down the driveway like a condemned man condemned to the hangman's noose. I braced myself for Jonathan's rage that I was sure was directed in my direction. I deserved every angry word, every insult. I could only hope that the poison I'd injected into his heart would seep out and allow me to redeem myself. Should I ring the bell or just walk in? Taking a deep breath, I decided to use the key and enter the house until Jonathan said otherwise. It was still my house. There was silence in the house. I called out to him, but there was no response. Was he ignoring me? Confused, I checked the kitchen, then the bedroom and bathroom. Jonathan was nowhere to be seen. My heartbeat sped up. Where was he? His car was here. Maybe one of our friends had come and picked him up. I walked to the dining room and surveyed the backyard from the windows. No sign of him. That left only one room where he could have been, his office. I frowned, standing in the doorway. He'd definitely been in this room recently, but it was a mess, which was uncharacteristic of Jonathan. He was usually a neat man. His chair had been pushed to the side. The small coffee table had been moved as well. There were papers scattered all over the table, as well as underneath it, which Jonathan always referred to as organized chaos, which was unusual. As I followed the line of papers, I noticed the phone was off the hook. I frowned. That was odd. And then I noticed an open answering machine that didn't have the usual cassette. Panic pinched my heart. I had a bad feeling about this, and I dropped my head to my chest trying to regulate my breathing, which had become low and shallow. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something sticking out from under the wheel of Jonathan's office chair. I bent down and pulled it out, barely sticking it to the carpet. A sticker? Why would Jonathan need a sticker? Laerdal HS1. What's Laerdal HS1? I lowered myself into Jonathan's chair and made myself comfortable in front of the computer. One tap on the keyboard informed me that Jonathan hadn't logged out. I went to Google and typed in the name on the label. Oh my God, the Heart Start 1 defibrillator. I swallowed my panic over and over, afraid to let my mind go where it wanted to go. I leaned forward, accidentally hitting the mouse, and opened Outlook. He'd sent the kids an email. I flipped through a couple lines, but the only word I remembered was prenup. I shook my head. I'd worry about the kids finding out what a fool I was later. Right now, I needed to get to Jonathan. I needed him to know how terribly sorry I was, how much I loved him, and needed him to fight for his life. I opened a new Google page and searched for the nearest hospital. With trembling hands, I called and asked if Jonathan had been admitted. My initial fears were realized. Jonathan was in the ICU. He had suffered a heart attack. I rushed into the kitchen, grabbed my car keys off the hook, and rushed to the garage. Waiting for the garage door to rise enough for me to get out was excruciating. I typed the address of the hospital into the navigator as I drove, all the while praying that Jonathan would survive. Please don't die. Please don't let him die. What the hell happened? Jonathan was as strong and powerful as an elephant. Every 2 years, he would get a physical with the company with results as if he was 15 years younger than his chronological age. I didn't know who to pray to. To God? Jonathan? All I knew was the hope that if I prayed and asked hard enough, Jonathan would be spared. Hell, that might even be a good thing. I could be his caregiver. He wouldn't be able to take care of himself, and what would I have? 1, maybe 2 weeks when he needs me? If I couldn't get him to forgive me in that time, it would be irreparable. The journey seemed very long. How I got there in one piece and with tears in my eyes, I'll never know. As usual, parking at the hospital turned out to be a nightmare. Fortunately, the emergency room had good signage. The bored nurse took her time asking about the mother and her baby. Why? The snotty little boy only had a bruised knee. You could tell by the way he was kicking the leg of the chair he was sitting on. When it was finally my turn, the nurse called my last name, made a quick phone call, and then told me to wait with the others. I sat there for probably almost an hour, figuring they were busy admitting Jonathan after his condition stabilized. Luckily, I had grabbed a spare phone charger on the way out of the house, and the emergency room had a convenient outlet. I distracted myself by Googling information about post-heart attack care and other things I wasn't particularly proud of at the time, but firmly believed in making provisions for everything. I read about stents and bypasses. They all seemed to require 2+ weeks of bed rest. The emergency room nurse came in and woke me up. I was led through the door between the waiting room and the emergency room. She didn't say anything as I was led into a small office just outside the doors. There sat a tired-looking guy in a white coat. Must be a doctor. He rose to his feet as I entered, an old-fashioned sort. A woman of about 50 remained seated with him. I sat down in the chair, armed with all my newfound knowledge, and listened to the prognosis. Further events were vaguely remembered at best. Somewhere in the first sentence was the phrase, "dead on arrival." I have no idea if I actually fell to the floor. Strangely, it seemed to me that I had been falling for an unusually long time. All of my completely inadequate, "what's the worst part" phrases from earlier came rushing through my brain with a tremendous amount of noise. Dave. I was completely shocked when the phone call woke me up from my slumber. It was a little after 9 in the morning, and it was Carly, Jonathan's daughter, who confirmed that she had heard the news and asked me to come over to their father's house. Oh yes, I'd heard everything. That's why I didn't sleep a wink. And yet, as the first glimmers of dawn painted the world pink, I realized that I wasn't to blame for my friend's death. How? Jonathan told me. Unable to sleep, I got up quietly so as not to wake Belinda. As usual, I checked my email and phone for messages. I had been too busy the previous night to look. The voicemail turned out to be from John, the time being 4:55 the previous day. Feeling like I was addressing the dead, I pressed the button and listened to what he had left. It was short, simple, and came from a body clearly in pain. Thanks for being a true friend, buddy. Bye. I went back to bed, climbed into Belinda's arms, and she hugged me while I mourned the great man. Belinda walked me to Jonathan's house, and we guessed almost unmistakably what they wanted. I said they. Yes, Jared had come down from Perth on the midnight bus and joined Carly at their old family home. They wanted to find out what their father had died of and, like many recently bereaved people, work out who to blame. Having established that Jonathan had emailed them before they were contacted by the hospital and told that their father had died and their mother was still there, sedated, Belinda and I built a timeline for them. Belinda got to John's house just in time to see his parked car, but no one answered the door. She plucked up her courage and walked around the house, peering in the windows. That's how she saw him lying on the floor. Luckily, the back door was open and she hurried inside. Jonathan was lying on the floor, clutching the house phone in one hand and, oddly enough, the answering machine in the other. He had no pulse that Belinda could feel. With one hand, she rolled him over onto his back, and with the other, she called the 000 service. Under the direction of the ambulance operator, she began CPR. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was close to exhaustion and thought she had lasted about 10 minutes. They pushed all the furniture back against the walls and hooked her up to the CPR machine. At this point, Belinda left the room to call me. By the time we had calmed each other down, the ambulance staff had already put Jonathan on a stretcher and were on their way to the ambulance. I asked Belinda to go back to John's office and describe the scene. The description was that she had followed the ambulance to the hospital, and in the back seat of her car were John's cell phone, an answering machine tape, an envelope with a legal document, my letter to Jonathan with attachments, and a signed letter that she found lying next to the keyboard on her desk. I, on the other hand, was on my way back to Brisbane Airport and on the next flight home. Belinda met me at the airport with news that wasn't a big surprise. While I was in the emergency room, a woman she recognized as Priscilla came in and sat there playing with her phone. After almost an hour, Priscilla was taken away and never showed up again. Belinda demanded an update from the ER nurse. Only after she admitted that it was she who had performed CPR and called the doctor was she told anything. But even then, it was limited to the phrase, "The lady is hospitalized and sedated after receiving the terrible news." The timeline we built showed what Jonathan had been doing in the last half hour of his life. Some of it was, of course, educated guesswork. I called him at 4:31, the exact time he was supposed to read my letter. There, on the table, were the printed photos. After that, he probably searched the file cabinet for the prenuptial agreement with Priscilla. That was the legal document in the envelope. We read it together, and it spelled out, among other things, that the cheating party to the marriage walks away, leaving only her personal property. Not surprising when you remember how his first marriage had broken up. He then wrote a one-page letter to his children expressing his love for them and his grandchildren, born and yet to be born. He then detailed my phone call and email, which is how they came across my name. He apologized for the impending divorce and how ruthlessly he intended to deal with their mother. Their mother, he told them, knows his views on infidelity, so it should come as no surprise to her that he intends to rigorously enforce the prenup. In contrast, he stated that he was going to take care of them and leave all his property to them, not her. Throughout the text, his love for them shone through, but his bitterness towards their mother grew. The evidence of his hatred overwhelmed the children. They understood things much better when I told them the untold story of their father's first wife and my own experience of love turning to hate. It is a terrible self-examination when one realizes that everything they thought for years was gospel turned out to be a lie. Their memories are tainted and their dreams shattered. Strangely, among the papers Belinda grabbed was a signed and dated copy of the letter. Next to the clear signature was an illegible scribble. We guessed that when he wrote it, he had been in severe mental anguish. The unusualness of the situation diminished after my attorney, who answered the phone on Saturday, answered a few of my questions. The only timeline by which we could determine the deadline was the message Jonathan left on my voicemail. By our calculations, his heart stopped during or shortly after Priscilla's confession, which we all listened to. We might have missed this evidence had he not grabbed the recorder and alerted Belinda to its existence. Once we had a rough idea of the order of events, I decided it was time for Belinda and me to leave the siblings. They probably had business they wanted to discuss in private. Just as I turned to signal Belinda, we all heard a car pull up to the house. We all turned our heads to the window at once. Priscilla was getting out of her BMW. Priscilla. Just like in the hospital, I slowly opened my eyes. When would this nightmare end? The sound of the front door opening and closing made me wince, and I squeezed my eyes shut even tighter. I'd never felt so alone and isolated in my life. The nightmare began when I woke up to the sound of a vacuum cleaner in the hospital room. I flinched at the sharp sound. I cautiously opened my eyes, squinting against the bright glare reflecting off the ultra-white ceiling. Turning my head to the side, I blinked a few times, trying to speed up my acclimation to the light. I groaned. My head ached. My senses were blurry, like I was trying to think through absorbent cotton. Why was I in the hospital? And then it all came back. Jonathan was gone. Dead. I'll never feel his embrace again, never see his smile or hear his laughter. The love of my life was gone. I couldn't accept it. Hot tears flowed in rivulets. I could feel the panic brewing in my lower back, building up and gaining strength, traveling up my spine. The sound of an animal suffering pierced my brain. Only after a moment did I realize that it was me, that I was the animal screaming in agony. I thrashed around the room, struggling with the blanket. Hands restrained me. Here, take this, Mrs. Carstairs. I swiveled my head back and forth, avoiding the rim of the plastic cup while simultaneously pushing my outstretched hand away. Escape. I needed to escape from my new reality. Shh, calm down. Take this and you'll feel better. Like a marionette whose strings had been cut, I sagged, unable to support my own weight. The nurse handed me the pill cup again, and I obediently sipped and swallowed. After a few minutes, I calmed down. Seeing that I was no longer a threat to myself or others, the nurse patted my arm, suggesting I recline on the many pillows she had placed behind my back. Someone will be in shortly to make sure you're all right. Get some rest until then. I complied with that instruction, calm but devastated. Jonathan was gone, forever. My mind was evasive. How long I waited for release, I didn't know. Time had no meaning. Everything I did was happening on autopilot. The only goal was to get home, to a familiar place where I could cry. I knew I needed to talk before trying to call Carly and Jared again. Maybe it was for the best that they didn't pick up when I tried to call. Seeing Carly's car in the driveway gave me pause for thought. I realized she must have gotten a call from the hospital. My emotions were mixed. Relief that I wouldn't be the one to break the terrible news, and horror at having to face her, knowing she knew something about my affair. For the second time in the last 24 hours, I walked up to my front door like a condemned man. I walked in and was stunned to see that not only Carly, but Jared was in the living room as well. But the biggest surprise was the presence of Dave and a blonde woman I didn't recognize and could only assume was his wife. I expected my kids to come over and give me a hug, and was puzzled when they remained seated. Both were looking at me judgmentally. I was stunned. I was pierced to the core. Without looking at me, Dave and his wife stood up and said goodbye, with his wife hugging both of my children. Dave hugged Carly and shook Jared's hand. Carly thanked Dave for what he had done for her father. What? Thanked him for what? For killing him? Closing the front door behind them, Jared walked back into the living room and sat down in his old seat. Carly avoided my gaze the entire time he was gone. I was just confused. Jared exchanged a glance with Carly. She nodded, signaling that her little brother would be acting as spokesperson. Mom, as you know, I am the executor of Dad's will, and I must tell you that after discussing things with my sister and others, I intend to honor Dad's last wish and enforce the terms of the prenuptial agreement you both signed all those years ago, especially the part that says you are left with nothing. Jared waved the prenup. His speech was mostly impassive, and he only looked at me when he emphasized the word, you. His eyes blazed. I was perplexed. Yes, I had cheated on their father. It happens to the best of us. But where is this hatred coming from? What do they know? They know nothing. I'd gone to Brisbane, and they were holding pictures of me kissing Paul. I reacted automatically. I hadn't been sitting around for the last half a day. Forget about the prenup. It only matters if I've committed adultery. So I went to Brisbane and was caught kissing another man. What does that prove? Carly leaned over to the coffee table, picked something up, and waved it at me. Damn, it was an answering machine recording. The same one that almost certainly had my confession on it. The situation was getting out of hand. I had to calm them down. Listen, kids, not that this has anything to do with you, but you should know that I've done my research. Even if I don't succeed in annulling this ancient marriage contract, the law is clear. Unless specifically stated, all of your father's property passes to me according to the terms of his last will and testament. Carly jumped to her feet, eyes blazing with anger. Nothing to do with us? Nothing to do with us. You evil by... Jared interrupted his sister, simply standing up and enclosing her in a hug. I envied her such human companionship. He made whisper-like sounds until her sobs subsided, then returned his attention to me. Say that. Maybe you're referring to the will we found in the file cabinet. Updated about 5 years ago. Is that the same one? Let me read something to you. He held up the letter I realized Jonathan had sent to the kids the previous afternoon. I stood with my head bowed as he laid out what and how Jonathan knew. I flinched as the letter turned into a tirade of hate directed at me. The thought of how hurt Jonathan had been when I first met him flashed through my mind. How wary and reluctant I was to trust him. How the hell had I managed to forget that? My mind tried to make a connection, but self-preservation got in the way. I forced myself to listen to Jared. He put the horrible letter aside again. This letter outlines my father's final wishes. As you can see, he took the time to print it out and sign it. There, you see? It baffled us until Dave called his lawyer. By signing it, it became his new last will and testament. Yes, Mom, you can challenge him and the prenup in court, but I'm giving you fair warning. Carly and I will fight you every step of the way. I looked at Carly in confusion. She nodded in agreement. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be true. Why? And dang! Carly pulled away from her brother and came up to my face. Mom, we were raised on the story of how you met Dad, how he sheltered us when we ended up on the streets. In a way, it made us love him even more than if he had been our birth father. He chose to do all these things with us and for us rather than treating our upbringing as an obligation. I have more childhood memories of my dad playing with me, helping me with homework, teaching me how to ride my bike, swim, and drive than you do. I am who I am today, and I think Jared would say the same, but because of him, not you. You were always too busy with your friends. You never wanted your clothes to be a mess and your hair to be a mess. We owe everything to him, and so do you. He loved us all with everything he had. Even you can't deny that. Dave told us about his father's first marriage and how he almost ruined it. You were there. You knew exactly how his cheating would turn out, but you did it anyway. But I didn't think... I never thought... It just happened. You make it sound like I'm an evil witch who deliberately destroyed your father. And you talk to that bastard Dave like he's your new best friend. He killed your father. Jared stood next to his sister and stared at me with an anger that felt like a physical jolt. No, Mom. Dave didn't kill Dad. You did. You stuck a knife in his guts and twisted them. That truth resonated in my soul, but before I could fully accept it, automatic defense mechanisms kicked in. The same way a corpse twitches for many seconds after life is gone. You can't pay attention to what he wrote in that damn letter. He was just murdered, and he spoke in anger. Your father loved me. Jared stepped even closer. Yes, he did speak. And yes, he spoke in anger. Imagine sitting here and knowing you're having a heart attack. How much passionate hatred does it take to write a letter, print it out, and even sign it when you could have called an ambulance yourself? That's how important his last words were to him. He risked his life for them. That's what I don't understand. How could he die of a heart attack? He was strong as an ox. God, he had a physical just 4 months ago, and the doctor told him he was as healthy as a 40-year-old man. Funny you should mention that, Mom. We asked the hospital that very question. And do you know what they told us? The hateful sarcasm in Carly's voice made me wince as I shook my head. Shock, Mom. Shock. Your betrayal shook him to the core and his poor broken heart shattered to pieces. Your selfishness, your vanity, your damn foolishness, as you so eloquently put it in your confession, broke him completely. My children and Jared's children will never know their grandfather because of you, and I, for one, can never forgive you for that. I stepped back as if I'd been pushed. Jared stepped forward as if bound to me. I will believe until my last breath that my father's last words to us were more important to him than his survival. I have to believe that because the alternative is too horrible. Carly turned to him perplexed. Yes. As an alternative, he knew the pain of betrayal about to descend upon him from the neighborhood our loyal mother was supposed to protect. Knew of the agony to come and consciously chose not to call an ambulance for himself. If I believed that for a second, I might never sleep again. That he chose to never know his grandchildren and for them to know him. It's too horrible to think about. Carly groaned and sank into the chair, her face going white. Jared stepped toward her, put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed it, then returned his attention to me. So, Mom, we're going to fulfill our father's last wish. And that's all I remember for a very, very long time. Epilogue, Priscilla. Sitting in the living room, surrounded by packing crates, my gaze fell on the small plastic container that held a small portion of Jonathan's ashes. I couldn't look at it for long. It was too painful and surreal. How could something so small, so ordinary, hold the remains of someone as great as Jonathan? I needed to move. I stood up and stretched my legs, then wandered aimlessly from one packed box to the next, running my fingertips along their edges. So little, really, from such a long, busy, and fulfilling life together. I guess I should consider myself lucky that the kids let me take so much. They could have made me leave with just clothes and toiletries. I walked around the room and stopped in front of the wall, where a beautiful antique sideboard once stood, and studied the ghostly outline of a photograph from our wedding. It showed Carly in Jonathan's arms, his arm around my waist, and Jared standing proudly in front of us. We were all smiling, glowing with happiness. The blank wall with its ghostly empty frame spoke to me more eloquently than any words about the emptiness of my future. I sighed, tired and sad. I was caught between a hammer and an anvil. I had an impossible decision to make. I could submit to Jonathan's last wish and walk away without a fight, keeping the hope that one day my children would forgive me and allow me to participate in their lives. That option meant poverty. My labor skills, other than housekeeping, were non-existent. I wasn't old enough to receive an old-age pension, but I was also too old to be truly competitive in the labor market when I had no qualifications. The other option was to fight my own children in open court, knowing that such a move would mean losing Carly and Jared and their families forever. And of course, I'd give up Jonathan's dying wish. Both options were disgusting. I could blame Dave for telling Jonathan. I could blame Jerome, my first husband, for leaving me for no reason. I could blame hormones or aging, or Paul for taking advantage of an older woman's vulnerability. Heck, a lot of psychologists would have told me I could blame my mother for dying when I was so young, or my father for being aloof and indifferent, but the truth was, yes, I could finally admit it, that I only blame myself. No one had forced me to respond to Paul's flattery. No one made me go to bed with him. No one forced me to lie, cheat, and betray the man I'd sworn to love for the rest of my life. I made that choice on my own, and now I had to live with the consequences. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.